Hello, I'm Scott and you're watching Your Experience Guide, and in this video today I'm going to be talking about Alton Towers Scarefest 2023. Now you might be thinking, it's only the start of August, why are we talking about a Halloween event? Well, it's usually around this time that we start hearing rumours and more information about what Alton Towers are going to do at Scarefest. So in this video I'm going to talk about what we know, which at the minute isn't a lot. Basically, the main information out there is that the event is going to run from the 7th of October, my birthday, and through to the 31st of October on selected dates throughout October. One of the biggest criticisms of Alton Towers Scarefest in the last couple of years is that the event has actually become really quite stale. I've seen people calling it Stale Fest quite a lot online, and that's because mazes like Altonville Mine Tours keeps coming back year after year. It's not been refreshed, it's not been replaced, it just keeps being brought back to the lineup every year. Now, of course, you could argue that it's because it's a popular maze, but I think sometimes, especially in a scare event in a theme park, I think you always need to keep refreshing the lineup, especially as there is always restricted sort of space in what you can do in these events within a theme park. Now, of course, that's very different when you look at something like Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights, but of course, we're talking about Alton Towers here, not Universal. The first part of the event that I really want to focus on in this video is the maze offering at Alton Towers Scarefest. Now, over the last couple of years, there has been complaints online of people basically calling the event Alton Towers Stale Fest, because we've seen the event kind of stay the same a lot over the last couple of years, which of course will have been impacted on because of things like COVID and all of the restrictions that Alton Towers were facing on putting together a Halloween event during the COVID era. However, when you look at something like Altonville Mine Tours, which first was introduced to the Scarefest lineup in 2016 and has been brought back every year since, and it is basically the same maze every time with minor changes, if that, you can kind of see why people are getting a little bit fed up of the same thing over and over again. The thing with a theme park Halloween event, I always feel like the lineup always needs to be refreshed every couple of years just to keep the event interesting, to make it feel different, and just to add a different dimension to it rather than it just being the same thing every year. So, edging towards the speculative side of this video, the one thing that I'd really like to see, probably above all when it comes to the mazes at Alton Towers Scarefest in 2023, is Altonville Mine Tours to be replaced with a completely new story, even if it uses the same area and the same route. Just a new story, new theming, even if it's the same actors. The actors in Altonville Mine Tours, they're always great. They always play to the storyline perfectly. I just think that we're all so used to that maze now, it's time for it to be replaced. Just something different in there, please. Alton Towers, we're begging you, do something different with that space. It's unrealistic though to expect Alton Towers to replace everything in terms of the Scarefest lineup. So I think seeing things like the Attic, Terror of the Towers to come back, and Darkest Depths to be brought back, totally fair enough really, because they're not that old compared to Altonville Mine Tours. Of course, in 2022, Alton Towers debuted a new type of scare attraction, which was called the Invitation. It was a story-led audio experience, which got a lot of bad reviews, I think it would be fair to say. Just got a gut feeling they're going to change that this year. I don't think they'll want another year where they have the exact same experience getting the exact same panning online. So I do get the feeling that they'll change that. They might keep the storyline, they might keep the audio part of it, but they might sort of make it a bit bigger. They might turn it into a more traditional scare maze and an audio experience rather than it just being a little bit of a story at the start, then the audio experience, and then the end. It might be a bit more traditional in terms of what a scare maze is, whilst keeping that new style audio experience as part of it. Now then, moving on to scare zones. Scare zones is something that Scarefest really needs to be a top tier Halloween event. When Alton Towers had the scare zones, when you think back to Nox Infernus in 2015, Freak Zone in 2016 and 2017, and other scare zones like that, the Dark Apocalypse by Nemesis in 2016, they really made Scarefest stand out as a top tier, UK Halloween event in my opinion. And ever since the scare zones have been taken away, Scarefest has just not been the same. And I think that even after everything I've just said about Altonville Mine Tours, they can keep that for another 20 years if they want to bring back scare zones around the park, because scare zones completely transform the atmosphere of Alton Towers Scarefest. Everybody knows that Alton Towers is massive. So when you're walking around the park in the dark in October on a Halloween event, you want some Halloween atmosphere in the park. Otherwise, it's just an evening at Alton Towers in the dark with a couple of scare mazes with no atmosphere around the park. The scare zones really brought Scarefest to life, and it's something that I really hope to see reintroduced to Alton Towers Scarefest in 2023. I don't think it's impossible for Alton Towers to keep Scarefest as a family-friendly event between, say, 10 AM and 5 PM, and then really ramp up the Halloween atmosphere from something like 5:30, 6 PM until 9 PM. For example, after, say, 5:30 or 6 PM, that's when the scare zones could begin, and then the scare mazes could be ramped up to a higher scare factor. For example, say between 1 o'clock when they start and 5 o'clock, they could maybe be a scare rating of like 6 out of 10. And then once we get towards it being a more spooky event after a certain time, the scares could be ramped up, the scare zones could begin, and the event could just change tone from being a family-friendly event in the daytime to in the evening time being more like it used to be, more of the Scarefest of old, more like what Fright Nights is at Fort Park. And I think that between 10 AM and 9 PM, Alton Towers could probably offer two different types of Scarefest in that same time. Like I say, you have it up to a certain time where it has got the family-friendly nature to the event. You've got the spooky Halloween shows that are appropriate for young families on Tower Street. You've got the Alton ancestors interacting with everybody on Tower Street, but after a certain time, bring out a scarier show. The ancestors could have a different tone and be a bit more spooky. You could have more scare zones, or scare zones, just some scare zones, please. Scarier scare mazes. You could do two events in one, basically, without charging people two different tickets. And I think that is probably their best way around getting past well, we want it to be a family-friendly event, because it can be a family-friendly event, but it can also be like the Scarefest of old by just combining the best of them over different parts of the day. Of course, it'll be difficult to execute, but I'm sure Alton Towers could do it. So in the unlikely event that Alton Towers do decide to do some scare zones, I do think that most obvious one is going to be by Nemesis, by Subterra, and just in that whole area where, of course, they've been doing the Nemesis construction for the last couple of months, because they could really pump up the marketing for Nemesis's reopening next year by having all of the phalanx in that area, continuing the Nemesis story that we've been seeing for the last couple of months, and just really, really hype up the reopening of Nemesis by just really playing on the story. Have the scare zone start by Subterra, end it by the Costa Lounge near where you walk towards Galactica. Smoke machines, spooky music, interactions with the actors. It would just be incredible, and it would really build the hype again, even more hype for Nemesis. But I just think that is the best way that they could really increase on the marketing of what they're doing already, by having a scare zone which is fully dedicated to the Nemesis story that we've all been seeing over the last couple of months. I think another great area for a scare zone at Alton Towers would, of course, be the Haunted Hollow, which is the long walk way between basically the end of Tower Street right up to the Curse at Alton Manor. The closer you get to the Curse at Alton Manor, you could start having a bit of a scare zone that's linked to that ride. Of course, all season, Alton Towers have actually had actors outside the Curse at Alton Manor. With all that said, what are my realistic expectations for Alton Towers Scarefest in 2023? Honestly, it really wouldn't shock me if the maze lineup is exactly the same. However, there has been photos dotted around on social media where there's been skips seen outside of where Altonville Mine Tours usually is, where Darkest Depths has been. So you never know, they might be clearing out all of that old theming that we've seen over the years and building new mazes, or they might just be taking some stuff out and putting some new scenes in. In terms of scare zones, I think it's more hope than expectation that they will add them to the offering for Scarefest. I think though, when you look at it, there's no reason not to do them. They've had Phalanx actors around Subterra quite a lot this year. They've had actors around the Curse at Alton Manor all year. So it's not like people aren't used to actors being around the park. Of course, they've not been scare actors at that time. They've been in character, but they have been interacting with people. And scare zones aren't about scaring the life out of people. They're just about making it spooky and making it good interactive experience. So hopefully they can implement it, but I don't think they will. I don't think they'll do it all over the park. I think there will be a push on the whole Nemesis thing by Subterra and by the Nemesis construction site, but I don't think they'll go big on a scare zone. I just think there'll be a few bits and bobs going on. So yeah, that's all really. What are your expectations for Scarefest 2023? What would you like to see Alton Towers do with Scarefest in 2023? Are you happy with the lineup they've had over the last couple of years? Do you think they need to change it? Or do you just think there's a little bit of a balance that they need to make with making it a little bit more scary whilst keeping it as a family-friendly event? If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.